terms of a couple of anecdotes. The first one actually happened in a court of law in the state of Massachusetts. An attorney was cross-examining a forensic pathologist. And the attorney was kind of curmudgeonly, sloppily dressed, kind of mean-looking. And the doctor was very well-dressed, very mild-mannered, well-groomed, quiet. And the dialogue went something like this. "Dr. Smith, before you began this autopsy, did you make sure the patient wasn't still alive? For example, did you check his breathing?" "Well, I didn't do that. I'm sorry, I didn't do that." "But Dr. Smith, surely you checked the patient's pulse before you began the autopsy." "I didn't do that either. I'm sorry." "Well, Dr. Smith, how did you know for sure the patient wasn't still alive before you began the autopsy?" "Well, for one thing, his brain was in a jar sitting on my desk." But this attorney was so lacking in emotional intelligence, he had such a strong agenda that was more important to him than hearing anything, that he didn't hear the information coming to him. His agenda was more important than the other person's statement. So he continued his linear logical line of reasoning, which he didn't want to give up. "Dr. Smith, despite all that, is it not possible the patient was still alive?" "Well, the patient might have been alive without a brain and practicing law somewhere." That's the absence of emotional intelligence, where someone has an agenda that they hold on to so tight that they don't get the information coming in. It's slightly exaggerated, but it happens all the time with all of us. We all have our agendas which keep us from listening closely to other people because we're afraid we'll lose our agenda. That's what keeps us from listening to other people too closely. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if there's one thing you take away from tonight, that's the one thing I want you to take with you. We're afraid of listening closely for fear of losing sight of our own agenda. That's the basic premise of my whole talk tonight. Now let me tell you what emotional intelligence is by way of some research that was done by Dr. Walter Mischel. He just wrote a book about it, came out a few months ago. It's called The Marshmallow Test. Anyone ever hear of the Marshmallow Test? Very simple. 4-year-old children were to come and brought into a room, and in front of them was a platter with a single marshmallow. And they were told, if you can avoid eating this marshmallow while I go out of the room for a few minutes, then you will earn a second marshmallow. Well, some of these children, curious, they felt the soft texture of the marshmallow, smelled its sweet, powdery aroma, gave it the old taste test. It tasted good. But just to make sure, they took a little bite, another bite, and pretty soon that marshmallow was history. But another group of children were determined to earn their reward. They had different strategies. Now, what strategy could a 4-year-old child have? Well, some of them sat on their hands so they wouldn't be tempted to pick up, smell, and eat the marshmallow. Others sang songs to themselves while the time went by so they wouldn't be tempted by the marshmallow. And others put their heads in their elbows, pretended to sleep while the minutes went by, and they were able to withstand the temptation. Now, a number of years later, Dr. Mischel tested these same children because they were the children of faculty at Stanford University and the children of staff at the university, so he could follow them up over the years to see if there's a difference between those who could and those who could not withstand the temptation. Well, we're talking about a single marshmallow. How much difference could there be between these two groups? What he found out and reported in this book that just came out was that those who could not withstand the temptation, who ate the marshmallow, they had low self-esteem. They fought with their peers. They did poorly at school. On the other hand, those who could withstand the temptation, they had a strong sense of initiative. They were able to take on projects and maintain them. They got along famously with their friends, and they did better at school as well. As a matter of fact, and this is one of the highlights of the book for me, it turns out that this marshmallow test, the single marshmallow test, was a better predictor of their college entrance exams, the Scholastic Achievement Test, the SATs. That marshmallow test was a better predictor of their score on the SAT than was their IQ. Imagine that. The IQ was not as good at predicting their success at the test than was the marshmallow test. So what is it that these children who could avoid the temptation, who could avoid eating the marshmallow, what quality did they have? Anybody? The ability to control their impulse, or what psychologists call delayed gratification. That's one of the 4 components that we now know as emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is made up of 4 basic components. The ability to know my feelings. What am I feeling from moment to moment? What are you feeling from moment to moment? Suri, or Ravi, or anyone, or the whole group. What is the group feeling at this moment? The 3rd component is controlling my emotions, especially the distracting ones like anger, rage, anxiety. And the 4th component is the ability to take all that information, all that awareness, and create successful outcomes. For example, I'm with you right now in front of you. I've never met most of you. The only one I know is Narcy from before. I know him for years, but the rest of you I've never met. So you can imagine driving here and coming here, I might feel a little bit of stress and anxiety. So I come here, I have some wonderful Indian food, the best Indian food I've had in my life, as a matter of fact. And I'm anticipating talking to you, and I can feel stress and anxiety, as you can imagine. But I look out here, and I see smiling faces, open eyes, nodding. I see that as I gauge your mood that you're welcoming me, you're warm to what I have to offer you. So I'm using my awareness of the group to help me know where I am. And now I take that awareness and I transform my anxiety and stress into enthusiasm and excitement as I share my experience with you. So here's an opportunity in real time to show you what emotional intelligence is. Knowing my feelings, in this case some stress and anxiety about addressing a new group. The ability to have empathy with the whole group, to figure out what the group is feeling at the moment. That's the 2nd component. The 3rd component is manage my feelings. I take the stress I thought I was feeling, and because I can see your welcoming faces and expressions, I can transform that stress into enthusiasm. Same level of arousal, same hormones in my body, but my brain is now interpreting them differently. Instead of interpreting them as stress, I now interpret it as excitement and enthusiasm. Same level, same hormones, different interpretation, which changes my attitude. Next one. So here are the 4 components. Knowing yourself, controlling yourself, controlling your negative emotions like anxiety and anger, knowing others, one other or a group, what are the dynamics of the group, and finally, doing something for others or creating success out of all that emotional awareness. That is what emotional intelligence is. So what's the history of emotional intelligence? Well, in 1983, Howard Gardner wrote a book on multiple intelligences. And he said we don't only have intellectual intelligence, that is book reading and ideas, we also have body intelligence, spatial awareness, athletic skills, musical intelligence. And 2 of the number of intelligences he talked about were intrapersonal intelligence, how I am inside, and interpersonal intelligence, how you interact with people. And those are the 2 intelligences that make up emotional intelligence. Knowing myself, controlling my feelings, intrapersonal, and interpersonal intelligence, how you are feeling, how I can help you create success. Now, I came up with my book in 1998, Putting Emotional Intelligence to Work. And I want to tell you about, it had to do with the power of deep listening, the purpose of emotions, how we use emotions. But one of the examples I used in my book was Jimmy Carter's attempt at using emotional intelligence before there was ever a word for it or a term for it. He was using the soft skills and the hard skills of negotiation. Instead of people coming together with their agendas already written by the underlings and then the heads of state just sign the forms, instead of having the press come and record this, he had an innovative way of trying to make peace between the Israelis and the Egyptians. And his innovative approach involved not having the press come, so they have a sense of privacy. It involved allowing people to talk from their heart, even if it meant they were at times angry. It meant being open to one another by letting people be emotional and know how they really feel about the issues. And here you had three men, a devout Jew, a devout Christian, a devout Muslim, coming together with their own ideas of what the truth really is about. Menachem Begin, Prime Minister of Israel, was sure that the truth was that Israel belongs to the Jews because of biblical heritage. Anwar Sadat, President of Egypt, knew the truth was that Jerusalem belongs to the Arabs, always has, always will. That was his truth. And Jimmy Carter had a different truth, that somehow these opposite opposing enemies could come together. They had different versions of the truth. And that's the challenge of emotional intelligence. We all have our own versions of the truth. I wrote this in an article many years ago. Truth is nothing more than a concept describing a majority consensus of valued peers. In other words, we get our sense of what is true by looking to the majority consensus of those we respect, admire, and hold as knowing. So each of those people have their own truths based on their traditions and their culture. This is why there are different cultures. They each have a different truth based on their history and who they respect telling them what is true. So how was Carter going to break down these separate truths to make one amalgamation of truth? Well, he asked these people to really understand where the other party was coming from. In most conventional delegations or negotiations, people would come to the table, they'd have negotiations, then they'd have to go off to their separate restaurant, separate place to eat, and then come back the next day. Carter did something different. He had them eat in communal kitchens or tables, so they ate together. They could chat together, get to know one another. And after the meals, they could have recreation together. They could play chess, or they could go bike riding in Camp David. And they got to know one another that way. So when there was yelling and screaming during the negotiations, they had enough companionship built in that they could transcend those bursts of emotion. So he allowed them to speak openly and honestly, emotionally, and he allowed failure to succeed. What do I mean by he allowed failure to succeed? Well, let me tell you what happened. As you can imagine, you have 2-3 different versions of the truth battling for primacy. And that gets frustrating. A lot of yelling, shouting. Carter would try to deal with it by saying, look, let me refresh your memory of what, take a note, this is what we said. And he'd say something maybe to make them laugh. And Carter tried to act as a facilitator to diminish the hostile and negative feelings. But at one point, it just didn't work anymore. Begin had had it up to here. He knew he could not get his truth amalgamated with the Egyptian version, and he just gave up. He went to his cabin, packed his bags, and his whole delegation were ready to take the shuttle to the airport. Carter was frustrated. He wanted this to succeed. He wasn't about to give up. He went to his office, and he begged for inspiration. He prayed for inspiration. He looked out his windows into the mountains that he could see through the windows, and suddenly he got an inspiration. He went over to Begin's cabin and said, Mr. Begin, I want to talk to you for a moment. They sat down, and Carter said, I brought something here for you. And he gave Begin a series of photographs of himself, autographed to each of Begin's grandchildren. And he said, Mr. Begin, what we're doing here is not for us. This is for our children and our children's children. And Begin, who was a hardened warrior during the time of the British colonial command over Palestine before Israel was formed, Begin was a warrior. He was one of those who helped bomb the King David Hotel. Almost like a terrorist. He was really a hard warrior, no emotions, very, very strict, very logical. But when he was given these photos for his grandchildren and heard what Carter said, tears came to his eyes, and his lips began to tremble. And he said, yes, Mr. Carter, you were right. I will return to the bargaining table. And so he returned, and they continued the negotiation, and the end result was the success of the Camp David peace accords. And the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jew were able to come together to an agreement. And to this very day, we still have an Egyptian embassy in Tel Aviv and an Israeli embassy in Egypt. Even to this day, with all the dynamics going on in the Mideast, that peace accord still stands. So, does emotional intelligence work? It helps you understand that those who had the emotional intelligence training could count on being understood and understanding others more by 42%. Manage relationships better, 51%. Influence others, 46% more. Resolve management and conflict, 43% more success after training with emotional intelligence. Improve morale, motivation, 34% greater. Improve teamwork, 44% greater. How do you measure this stuff? There are metrics. Sales volume determines your success. Bottom line profits. Less turnover in the team, because turnovers can be expensive as well. As a matter of fact, Sanofi Aventis, the pharmacy, there we go, they had a 12% increase in sales based on training in emotional intelligence. The company L'Oreal had an increase of revenue of over $2.5 million based on their training their salespeople with emotional intelligence. The U.S. Air Force trained their recruiters to choose and recruit on the basis of emotional intelligence, and they saved themselves $3 million a year. Yes, emotional intelligence works. So what are some of the soft skills of emotional intelligence? How do you actually get it? Well, each member is accepted by every other member, because now the team is working so that everybody cares about everyone else. Everybody makes sure everyone is heard, even those with a soft voice, even the shy people. They ascertain and make sure that these people have their voice heard and that they feel secure in that group, so they work seamlessly as a team. Everything is equally shared. The credit that the team gets is equally shared as a team, not competing for attention within the team. The commitment is shared and demonstrated. They all work for one another. They work to make sure everyone gets the benefit as a team. Opinions, contributions are all valued. Everyone helps one another. So teamwork is seamless and much more productive. The leader will be trustworthy. That means that the leader doesn't always have to be the one in power all the time, because there may be someone at some point that has expertise that will apply to a certain issue at hand. And the flexible leader will yield his or her power at that moment to let this other person take over, so that person could at that point take over the leadership for that issue because of that expertise. And as time goes on and some other problem comes up with a different focus, someone else may come up and take the leadership at that point. So the leader is very flexible, never gives up his accountability entirely, but there's enough trust among them that he can yield and step back and let someone else take the leadership for a period of time. So I want to share with you what it's like to gain trust. There's something happening in the business world now that is very new. Trust has always been an issue, but what we're learning now, very recently, is that the way to form trust is to open up about yourself and do what Rogers has done and be more vulnerable. And that builds trust. So we're going to have an exercise here just to give you an experience of that. Take a moment and form groups of three, and I'll tell you what to do. Just get groups of three so that you're close together. Now, you can't sit where you're getting. Get up for a second and move your chair so that your chairs are facing into the center. So your knees are practically touching. Go ahead and do it.